Hey everybody, I'm Lauren Mulcahy de la Cruz. I'm coming from Lynn, Massachusetts. I'm currently studying at Oral Roberts University in Oklahoma. Obviously it's online, and I'm partaking in an amazing class at this moment in time. It is called Spirit Empowered Living Part 2. And for this class, I have learned something that is very dear to my heart, and it's a subject that I'm going to present to you today. I want you to listen, to get an understanding of this subject so that you too can understand why it's so dear to my heart. With that, I want to talk to you today about the Pentecostal movement. What is this Pentecostal movement, and when did it start? Where did it come from? A lot of people, you hear the word Pentecost, Pentecostal, and yes, we think the day of Pentecost. That is where it reigns supreme in the upper room, in Acts chapter 2, 1 through 11, and you see that the disciples and many of Jesus' followers, after Jesus had left and was resurrected on the third day, now he was up in heaven, and he said in John 14:16, he said, I'm going to send to you. Yes, I'm going up. I won't be here walking on earth with you, so I'm going to send to you a helper. And many translations, they say helper, comforter, advocate, and counselor. So these people in Acts are waiting for that promise. They're all together, and I want you to know they are all together in one accord. They're in one mindset, waiting with that spirit of hope within them, waiting for this outpouring of this gift that Jesus once talked about. So we see that in the upper room, they were all in one accord, and something started to happen. What was it? It was the manifestation of God, of Jesus, the Holy Spirit, coming down to earth and manifesting in this upper room where they're all waiting. So this spirit is manifested, and I know you might say, what is this manifestation? It's an unknown word if you're not within the Christian community. So the manifestation is basically a change in the atmosphere. Okay, God is coming down to be among his people. So this atmosphere changes, and I mean, the only thing that we can say really is everybody gets goosebumps, right? So that feeling of God is in the house, that's what's happening. That is the manifestation, and the manifestation of God came first, and then it's the descent of the Holy Spirit onto these people who already have their hearts open. They're already waiting, they're already willing, keywords, and they open up their hearts, and then the Holy Spirit descends on them. So once this descent happens, it comes in many different ways in the Bible. In this particular verse, it came through fire, manifested like the beautiful colors of autumn above my head. The flames were manifested above the heads of each believer, and that was the presence of God. That was the glory of God. And when that descendant happened, they were then being filled up by the Holy Spirit, filled up by God's presence, God's glory, and with this glory being filled up to such a point, it was a God explosion, and the Holy Spirit through them exploded out. The fire came out. They started to speak in other tongues. What is this? Speaking in other tongues. I want to touch on this because it is dear to my heart, because I want you to know that speaking in tongues, there's two kinds of speaking in tongues. One, with what happened in Acts, they started to speak in other known languages. Okay, the people are outside, they heard them, and they're like, hey, they're speaking my language, but they're not of my culture, they're not from my nation. How are they speaking in my language? This is one of the ways that God manifests through the Holy Spirit to speak in tongues. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. I'll touch on it a little later in the video. And the reason why I wanted to say that is because there's another speaking in tongues, and that is an angelic speaking in tongues. Oral Roberts coined it as the prayer language. This is the language that you're speaking to God, and he's receiving those words directly at his throne. No interference. The devil cannot come and listen to your prayer language because he will not understand it. And that's key. That's why the speaking in tongues is so crucial to the believer, because when you're speaking in tongues, your email is going straight to the throne. That is very important. Okay, so the first sign that we just talked about is the speaking of tongues. That's important when we talk about the Pentecostal movement in a whole, because ready for this? 1901. Now let's think about this. The biblical times, Jesus died and he resurrected. The world, the timeline of the world was split into two. Now we have before Christ and after his death. Now we come 1,901 years later, after Jesus has gone up, and at that all that time, people are thinking, wait a minute, the practices from the Bible is for the people of the Bible. So God gave these gifts and all that for the people of the Bible. Wrong. There was until a woman named Agnes Osmond. Ready for it? Agnes Osmond was a part of a small Bible college. This is what I want you to wrap your heads around, because this is how the movement is coming to play in our world today. So, the Bible College in Topeka, Kansas was founded by Charles Parham. Charles Parham, he believed that these gifts and that the tongues and that it was for us today. So he started to preach on it, and it was New Year's 1901 that Agnes Osmond opened up her heart and she said, I want you to pray for me. I want to speak in new tongues, pray for new tongues. And let me tell you, the Lord appeased her. He sent down his Holy Spirit. He filled Agnes with tongues, and she did not speak in the prayer language tongues. She spoke in other known tongues. This lady spoke in Chinese for 3 days. Okay? Many people are like, no, I don't believe it. Yes, Google it. But in the spirit, you will know that it is true with the following information. So she spoke in 3 days in Chinese. Nobody could understand her, so she was even writing in Chinese. Okay, so she was the first one. She was the first one in 1901, after all of these years have passed, to speak in tongues. Now there in the church where Charles Parham was, it diminished, and he moved to Texas. Now in Texas he started up again, and there in Texas, one of the people that was congregating with him, her name was Lucy Farrow. Lucy Farrow was filled with the Spirit, and she became a pastor in one of the churches. A man in her congregation named William J. Seymour. Very important names in the Pentecostal movement. So William J. Seymour. Now keep in mind, he is an African American man. In times where segregation is on the rise, Jim Crow laws are in place, he wants to now study under Charles Parham. Okay, so his pastor, which is Lucy Farrow. So she says, yes, go study with him. He goes, and he's not able to go into the classroom with Parham because he's an African American man. So he had to stay outside of the classroom, sitting on a chair, learning about this revived idea of talking in tongues and the gifts of the Holy Spirit. So with that, he learns, he gains his knowledge, he's baptized in the Holy Spirit, he speaks in tongues, and then he is recruited to go to be launched. He's recruited. He's called to go to Los Angeles. So now Charles Seymour goes to Los Angeles, and this is where, within the Christian community, we've heard of Azusa Street, the Azusa Street revivals. What is this? He started a church, and with the principles of speaking in tongues, African American pastor, and just happens that people from all over the world, all nations, all languages, all colors, they come to be baptized in the Spirit by William J. Seymour. Okay, so the revival on Azusa Street started in 1906. This continued for 3.5 years. 3.5 years of people being filled by the Spirit, speaking other tongues. They had 3 services a day. 3 services a day, 7 days a week. The amount of people that were being baptized, it was beyond. It was amazing. That's why it's so recognized in the Pentecostal Christian community, because this event was like a change in the timeline as well. So this, with the Azusa Street revival, all of these people getting baptized in the Spirit, and then they're being launched out. They're starting to go out and start their own churches and revivals. Our own Chancellor Oral Roberts, from the university that I study at, he was from a church that was launched out from the Azusa Street. So many people came from that movement. There were people that went to Brazil. Brazil nowadays is actually known to be like half of their population is Pentecostal, charismatic believers, because of that movement, because a person went down there with the calling of the Lord to give them that precious gift through God. So the Pentecostal movement continues to spreads through the United States, spreads through Europe, continues on, like I said, through Brazil, Guatemala, and these are beautiful points, because nowadays it's everywhere you look. There are so many Pentecostal Christian evangelistic churches, and people that believe in this movement, millions and millions and millions throughout the world now, and it all came from these events that I have mentioned here. And please remember that the Pentecostal movement started 1906 on Azusa Street. That gospel went out throughout the world. The gospel, the tongues, the Holy Spirit baptizing people, and it didn't go out through the TV networks, okay? There was no TV, there was no radios. This was Holy Spirit filled people going to the nations. That, my friends, should inspire us, okay? Because that movement is still alive today. We are called to be Spirit filled, speaking in tongues, worship tongues and other language tongues, getting the word of the gospel out to the nations for Jesus, especially because, yes, Jesus is coming. They don't mention it as often as they should these days, but he is coming, and we need to be ready, and we need to help people get ready. Okay? To wrap this all up, I encourage you all, seek a Bible believing church, find the Lord, one, and once you found him, ask him to baptize you in the Holy Spirit, because it is something that you will not have words for. It is a love and a joy that you are filled with, that you then can shine to other people. And I thank you for watching this video. I bless you. Feel free to comment, because I'm putting this on my YouTube channel. Ms. Dela Cruz 2020. God bless you, and may the Holy Spirit fill you in these days.